This episode of Over a Barrel is brought to you by Valero. Valero believes in being good neighbors. That's why they don't just fuel our cars, they fuel communities too, with thousands of volunteer hours and millions of donations. Right now. Coming up on Over a Barrel, the seasonality beginning to kick in. Exactly how high gas prices are going to go, well, that's what we're going to be discussing today. Over a Barrel starts right now. Welcome to the program. I'm Matt McLean. That's Patrick DeHaan. Make sure you like, subscribe, love us. We're here. We're here.
Love
Podcasting.
That escalated quickly.
Spotify, YouTube, we're everywhere. Just make sure that you find your perfect spot that you happen to love listening or watching things to, and you'll basically find the episode of the podcast here. And well, first of all, welcome, Patrick. And how are you, sir?
I'm good, Matt. Good to be back with you again. We are getting into the seasonal motion of things. It's not always the most favorite time of year for motorists, but here we are talking about the spring surge.
Absolutely. And I know that, that's something that'll be on a lot of people's minds over the coming weeks because, take, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I paid $2.39 a gallon. And because of some other stuff, I was paying $2.89 a gallon, and other stuff as in me not having any control over it, unfortunately. But the price had already started to go up. So What is it that we are looking at really coming into, February, March, April? What are your thoughts on all of this? And am I going to like the news for my $1.99 threshold? I caved. I stopped saying 99 cents. But am I going to get a $1.99? I'm assuming I know the answer to this.
You're going to have to hold your breath a little bit. Like to your point, though, this is the time of year that we start talking about the transition away. There's a little bit of a fire sale that could happen, though. A lot of the winter gasoline that's been produced over the course of February, even January and December, this is the time of year, the winter is the weakest time of year for gasoline demand. And so a lot of that gasoline starts to stockpile. And as we get closer to late winter, early spring, before refineries start to make that transition to summer gasoline, they have to get rid of the winter gasoline. It cannot stay in the system. There's not a good shelf life that it stays stable for months. So usually refineries will start discounting the remaining winter gasoline to get rid of it, to get station owners to buy it, to put it in their storage tanks. So typically around February, sometimes late January, but most of the time early to mid-February, you start to get those clearance sales. A lot of refineries start to offer those. Yeah. Woo. But
you got you see, I'm leaning in closer to the camera. Like, talk to me, Patrick.
Tell me more.
Sales. I like this.
But usually it does not happen in every place. So usually these clearance sales only happen in areas that are landlocked, areas like the Midwest, the Rockies, primarily not any of the coastal regions. If you made a map, Matt, and went to like Washington, Oregon, California, down to Texas, then Florida, then all the way up the East Coast, those are areas that you don't usually see a winter clearance sale. Why? Because any excess gasoline can be exported. Right. So there's not the urgency to get rid of the buildup because those coastal areas can simply throw gasoline on a boat, sell it to another country. And that's why you get a big discount in areas of the Rockies, areas like the Great Lakes and Midwest, because there's not really an easy ability to get rid of that remaining winter gasoline. So if you're in those areas,
have to get rid of it, right? I mean, they have to basically offload the gasoline because of the reformulated gasoline conditions that are engaged, in late spring. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly it. 100%. You start to see the transition in some areas versus others. And there's all these different dates, by the way, Matt, depending on where you are. Like California, for example, they will already start making the transition to summer gasoline at the end of January. January 31st is the first date that they actually roll to their full summer spec. So it starts in California first. California is a big state. It warms up there. San Diego, LA tend to be warm enough this time of year. And then it starts to propagate through much of the rest of the country. And a lot of different areas have different dates. For example, San Francisco doesn't make the change until February 25th. So there's about 3 weeks between when LA makes the switch versus San Francisco. And then you move to other markets like the Pacific Northwest. It really doesn't start until March 17th. They make a small incremental step on February 17th, but they don't really start in bulk until March. And a lot of the Midwest markets as well, March 15th is roughly, we make a transitory step in February. It's a small step. February 25th for some areas, and then March 25th is the second step. So, Matt, at the end of the day here, usually around February is when those clearance sales will start for the Great Lakes and for the Rocky Mountains, because there's not a whole lot of areas where you can get rid of gasoline aside from discounting it and getting gas stations to fill up. And then it's the perfect storm, by the way. So, we'll start with that. The clearance sale is going to be happening in the next couple of weeks, but the whiplash is going to start after that.
So let me ask you this: when it comes to the reformulated gasoline, obviously gasoline producers, refineries,
yep,
they have to start producing it by a certain time, depending upon what part of the country that they are in, understandably. What about gas stations? Do they have to have all of the winter blend, if you will, out of their tanks by a certain threshold, or is that kind of piecemeal together across the country as well?
No, they do. They definitely do have requirements. Now, the requirements vary. They're different for refineries versus gas stations, right? Because as you get closer to the pump, you're given a little bit more time to work through that. For example, if a retailer buys a bunch of cheaper winter gasoline, they are given until the start of June, basically the end of May, is when they have to get rid of all of it by. Now, normally they do so many weeks in advance, because think of, Matt, the mitigation. If you have winter gasoline and you're no longer allowed to sell it, you've got to pull that winter gasoline out of your tanks. The state will require you to do that so that you're selling an on-spec product, basically an on-specification product. So, it becomes hugely complex depending on where you are in the country. All these dates are different. Some areas, it happens faster, and that's just at the retail level. So yes, retailers are on a different schedule than refineries. Refineries are on a different schedule too than pipelines. So even the pipelines, Matt, are basically the ones that dictate the schedule for refineries, because pipelines have the unique position of having to ship gasoline. And if that gasoline does not meet the specifications, where is it going to get stuck? In the pipeline. And so pipeline operators basically say,
literally in the pipeline, right? Am I understanding that correctly? That's not a proverbial pipeline. That's a literal, actual pipeline.
Literally stuck in the pipeline. So yeah, that's the other disadvantage. So Matt, this is a very complex system of how this happens. And we're just talking about the dates of gasoline. I haven't even thrown in the complexity. Here's the other thing. The weather is extremely cold in January and February. Construction workers do not want to be outside working on refineries, especially in the northern tier of the country in January and February. It's just too darn cold. You can't really do a whole lot. The thing is once it starts to warm up in March and April, that's really when you have kind of the trifecta of refinery maintenance. Maintenance happens before summer. Summer's when gasoline demand peaks. So refineries do not want to do work on refineries in the summer. It's kind of like an airline. When people are traveling on summer vacations, you don't want your aircraft going out of service in June or July.
Right.
You want to be ready for June or July. So that's why refineries do refinery maintenance before the summer. The problem is, Matt, a lot of the time that maintenance is overlapping with the transition to summer gasoline. And so when the
But there's some logic to that, is there not? Because if you're moving to a different form of gasoline, a reformulated version, one would think that you're going to have to fine tune a few things within the refinery to be able to produce the different type of gasoline.
Yeah, exactly. But the market gets freaked out because, as I said, that winter gasoline can't be sold in the spring anymore, right? So,
and it won't still be good this fall or winter.
Correct.
Whenever that version of gasoline, like they can't just store it up. We found
there's
that
a
out
shelf
in the
life to
Northeast and the
gasoline.
gasoline strategic reserve that did not.
And
go
by
so
the way,
well
that's
in
why
Northeast.
there is no gas. Well, there's not anymore, and that's why it's hugely complex, because you're constantly having to turn your tank or basically drain the tank, fill it up, drain it, fill it up, because gasoline has a shelf life. But the other complexity here, Matt, is and I forgot. I think I forgot what I was going to say. I'm going to quickly try to get my brain back online here. Oh, supply. So you go
Yes.
from a ton of winter gasoline. Same thing happens with summer gasoline, is it does not hold. So what happens when suddenly you go from a mountain of a mountain of winter gasoline, and all of a sudden that's gone? You very quickly need all of the summer gasoline to be in position. The problem is there's usually not a bunch of summer gasoline at the start of the transition because there's none held over from the past year.
Right, right,
So
right,
and
right.
and that gets complex because now refineries don't have as much capacity in the spring, sorry. When the transition happens, there's not as much gasoline and refineries don't have as much ability to produce as much as quickly because they're undergoing maintenance.
Hmm.
So that's usually where this kind of perfect storm comes from every spring, Matt. It's the fact that you switch from winter to summer, refineries are doing maintenance, there's no supply yet. So that's three. There's no supply yet of summer gasoline. And then the fourth complexity, it's kind of like coming out of hibernation, Matt. When the temperatures start warming up, people want to get out. People drive more.
That's
They
exactly
start
right.
going outside and having more activities, right? We go from a little bit of dormancy in winter. So there's four complexities, and that's what causes gas prices to go up virtually every spring, year in and year out.
Yeah, and that's something to really keep in tune with all of that. I'm not hearing you say no to my question of $1.99 a gallon, but I'm not hearing you say yes either. So I'm going to probably say
Would you
the
like an
answer is
answer?
no. Yeah, I would say the answer is probably no. If I know you as well as I think that I do, it's just a fat chance at this point. Am I?
Yeah, it's
That's what I
no.
thought.
It's no. It's no.
That
But
is unfortunate.
I'd like to spell this out too, so people can see. And by the way, obviously we do have an administration in the Oval Office this spring that wasn't there last year, and this is still going to happen, folks. I'm going to quickly look at a chart. Obviously, 2020 was the pandemic, so we've got to exclude. The pandemic started in March. Remember, everything shut down, and so gas prices did plummet in spring of 2020. This is extremely unusual. But if we go to 2021, you see it right here. Gas prices went up a lot, mostly in winter, because you'll remember the economy. That's when vaccines were allowing portions of the economy to reopen. So that was
It was
unusual.
Yeah, it was time to roar back.
Yeah, so that was unusual, Matt. Most of the increase usually happens in March and April. But if you look, I mean, prices did go up in spring, but more of the increase in 2021 happened as the vaccine was being distributed. And if you'll remember that was like February, March, that was the time frame. So the economy started to reopen in 2021. Let's go to 2022, the spring. So here's the gas prices declining in December until about January. And then February, once it became more clear that Russia was about to launch an attack, gas prices skyrocketed up to about $4.32 in March. They did go down a little bit.
Yeah. Don't remind me.
Because we got a little bit of the markets cooled off after the initial shock. But then, Matt, we found out as the economy reopened, the federal mask mandate, by the way, Matt, can you pull that up while I'm showing this chart? When was the federal mask mandate rescinded?
Yeah, let me pull that up for you.
So then prices skyrocketed in 2022. So, all of this, here it is, Matt. Due to the court ruling today, it was April 18 of 2022.
When the federal mask
Yeah,
rate?
I'm going to right here.
I literally got it right here. Yeah, you
So
got the same
April
thing.
18, 2022, Matt, look what happened. Let's zoom in here. Oh, hey, look, April 16 is when we bottomed out, and then suddenly gas prices started going up. So case in point, everyone wants to blame, President Biden for what happened in 2022, but the federal mask mandate, going back here, look at this, folks. If you're tuning in on YouTube, if you're not, I'm trying to spell it out. Gas prices peaked in March of 2022 at $4.34. From March through mid-April, they declined. And guess what happened, Matt? Hey, look, the day before the mask mandate was rescinded, they bottomed out at $4.07. The day the federal mask mandate was rescinded was April 18. And look what happened. Look what happened. This is the big surge in prices because, Matt, as soon as the economy, basically, if you remember,
Oh,
when the mask
Patrick,
mandate was
I've tried to
rescinded,
forget the price of
when it was
gas.
rescinded, it was like the world is going back to normal. The airline suddenly saw a huge surge in people booking travel. Americans started filling up. Demand for gasoline skyrocketed because that was basically the de facto end of COVID.
Yep.
So basically, that's why 2022 is a little different. Let's look at 2023, Matt. Let's zoom in here a little
Okay.
bit. So look at prices plummeted in fall. They went up a little bit because of a winter storm. They jumped in early January, but then they tapered off.
Don't touch that device. We've got more Over a Barrel coming up right after our sponsor, Valero.
All across America, you'll find Valero at your go-to gas station, volunteering with local charities and fueling communities 365 days a year, so you can always get where you need to be, right now.
And now for the rest of Over a Barrel.
But again, look at the winter prices here, Matt, and then look what happened ahead of the summer. And by the way, this late summer surge was actually a result of refinery outages that happened in the Midwest. So, we got a little bit of a surge there in 2023, but it was pretty subdued. So 366 until the summer, and then prices tapered off. And 2024, by the way, last year was a much more normal year. Prices bottomed out in January. They slowly started to go up. They peaked in about mid-April. And then look at that. They went down the rest of the year. So, by the way, that's what I would expect this year, Matt. We're going to start going up here, and it's all because the seasonality that we just spelled out to you, refinery maintenance, the change to summer gasoline, an increase in demand. And as the change to summer gas is happening, there's going to be very low supply.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the key. So for the upcoming couple of months, the key that unless there's any kind of, and look,
there could be abnormal, back in 2020, right? There's abnormalities.
In this world, over the past decade or a little bit less, if there's something that past several years have taught us anything, is that anybody who says they own the crystal ball and know exactly what's going to happen 6 months from now, no. I'm sorry, but no. There's a lot of things that could take. No. Yeah, there's a lot of things that could create problems between now and then, geopolitically, all kinds of aspects that could create some issues, things that we would have no control over. We look even the past several years with little conflicts. Let me rephrase that. Let me take away the word little. With conflicts that have taken place across portions of the globe and how that temporarily impacted prices, and to some degree factored in a little bit more of a longer-term impact on prices, depending upon which conflict we're talking about. So there are obviously things that could boil over at any given moment and create some issues for us that are not on anyone's radar right now. And that's exactly the key that we have to keep a watchful eye on.
And Matt, perfect example, absolutely, because COVID, that was unexpected.
Very unexpected.
And the federal mask mandate being rescinded, that's unexpected. And 2021, right? Nobody had ever lived through a pandemic. So that's why there's a lot of noise that happened in 2020. That's why gas prices abnormally went down in the spring of 2020 was because of COVID. Oh. And that's why gas prices surged in 2022 was because the federal mask mandate. How it couldn't be more perfect, Matt. We looked up the date and it was April 18th. And literally on that chart, gas prices started going up on April 18th.
Yeah.
Because of,
but I mean, think about it though. I mean, a lot of people look, I tried to forget, I have tried to forget, but now you're bringing back all kinds of memories. But I couldn't even travel from one state to the other without having a Department of Homeland or whatever.
Card.
Yeah. I had to have a press thing that allowed me to travel.
That was friction. And that's why gas prices went down during COVID, because there's so much friction to traveling. So many businesses were shut down. First responders, I remember all of that. So, I mean, exactly. A lot of folks are like, oh, President Trump at the time, because it was President Trump still in 2020. He did that. Well, no, actually COVID did. Right. Yeah. And that's why, by the way, we're not going to see a repeat of those sorry, Matt, we're not going to see sub $2 prices. But I want to very quickly bring up what we are expecting in the year ahead. And again, looping it all around to the seasonality. As we get to late winter, look at some of these holidays, Matt. Easter prices are going to be higher than they are today. Memorial Day prices are still going to be in the mid to upper threes. July 4. But then look at the end of the year. What happens? We start seeing the twos, 222. If you look here.
I'm not complaining.
What goes up in the spring, Matt? We talk about the seasonality. It actually goes up in the spring. And the seasonality then reverses in the fall for the same reasons then. Inverse. People drive less as it gets colder. We switch from more expensive summer back to cheaper winter gasoline. Demand decreases. So, it's basically a flip-flop. Every spring it goes up and every fall it goes down. And a president is not going to really change that. To your point, though, the balance of supply and demand, if it changes, if there's geopolitical tensions, if there's a war, if there's a pandemic, those are huge potential impacts on gas prices. And that's why, if we scroll down to our forecast, that's why it goes up in the spring. And look at that. Aside from August, and by the way, the only reason August, you'll see there, it's a wider margin of error. The only reason for that, Matt, is hurricane season.
Yeah.
And by the way, why hurricane season's still active in September. So why the difference in August and September? Well, September.
I know the answer.
So September, we start rolling over to winter gasoline. And by September, by the way, there's a lot more summer gasoline built up. And generally, when you get to September, refineries are on cruise control. Generally in August is when refineries start producing winter gasoline again. Generally, they don't. Generally in August, because the regulations are still there on the retail level, right? If there is a hurricane, that can really mess with the refineries' plans on how they shift over to winter gas.
I don't envy anybody who has to keep their finger to that pulse. Basically, always that supply and demand plus unforeseen circumstances and not having a ton of wasted product that is no longer usable. And by the time, the next cycle comes through in the year where it is a formulated version of gasoline that could be used again, what they have left over is unusable. I mean, that just sounds like it takes a lot of talent, I would think, and a lot of expertise to be able to predict that down.
Let me pull this up, Matt. This is a RVP calendar. These are all different regions of the country. New York, Buckeye Pipeline, that would be Midwest. Laurel Pipeline, that's East. New York Harbor, Linden Junction, that's New Jersey. If you go to the Midwest, there's the Buckeye Complex, there's Chicago Market. All of these areas, Matt, change at different times of the year. The Gulf Coast. Look at this. These are different cycles, by the way, pipeline cycles. That's how pipelines operate in cycles. When one cycle is done, they move to the next cycle. And so this pipeline doesn't use dates, but cycles. And then the West Coast uses dates too. So, Matt, to your point, this is tremendously complex. And by the way, if you think this is easy for retailers to figure out, nope, it's not. Because I've literally sat on conferences where retailers are thinking, how do we get, what does the state require? How quickly, because the state does send out inspectors to make sure that summer gasoline is the only thing that's sold. They do tests. They can literally test the gasoline to see if it's winter or summer. So, this is why it's such a challenge to get this all figured out. This is what people go through every spring. And Matt, now just imagine, I haven't even mentioned if there's a refinery that goes down unexpectedly, not even maintenance. Maintenance is a known thing. If a refinery goes down unexpectedly, that really blows everything
That's the
up.
hiccup. That's the hiccup.
Now you've got to really, your plan was somewhat established, but now you've got to change everything and go back to the drawing board, because what if it's the largest refinery that goes down unexpectedly? Or Matt, how many times have you gone and take your car? Well, hopefully not you, because you have a Mazda. How many times do people take their car to the repair shop and you get that phone call? Oh, we found something else. That can happen at refineries where things don't go perfect. They don't go to plan. So what if that refinery, which you're expecting to receive supply from, suddenly says, well, our maintenance isn't done yet. We've got to do it another week or two. So spring is madness. There's a reason why there's a basketball tournament called March Madness. March Madness also applies to what retailers are going through. And this, on the retail level, Matt, this is maddening. You've got to have everything planned to a T, and you've got to be ready for the unexpected.
So whenever you do, and they do happen, they have happened in the past, like a refinery, fire, heaven forbid, or whatever the case may be, or a power outage that sends electricity to a refinery. There are moments where these things can happen and have happened in the past couple of years. Even since we've been doing this podcast the past couple of years, those instances have happened. Then you see, like, the price spike. And that's different than a price cycle, where we have talked about that on the podcast as well.
Yep.
A couple of podcasts ago, I even asked you something along the lines of, hey, I paid $2.39 a gallon several podcasts ago, and all of a sudden I'm paying $2.89. Is that a price spike, or is that just a whatever kind of a situation going on, right? So there are different aspects of things that can truly create a bit of a hiccup. It's tough.
Well, and as we just pointed out too, Matt, the interesting dynamic here is that we just said that LA is going to be switching to summer gasoline a lot earlier than the Bay Area. So if you're in California and if you're traveling between, say, San Francisco and LA in, early February or mid-February, you're probably going to notice that there's a difference in gas prices between the Bay Area, who's still on winter gasoline, and Southern California, who's making the transition to summer gasoline the earliest in the nation, by the way. So
I have a generalized question. I think it bears asking, because I can almost hear half of our listeners asking this question and whispering it in my ear. Why not some of the southern states? Why do they ever need to flip back and forth if, like, a reformulated gasoline, for example, is more of a temperature variant, for the, I know the additives and different aspects, the smog reduction and other aspects, but in like Florida, basically southern states, is there a reason why they have to flip back from reformulated to the winter blend if the temperature and other aspects are really minuscule compared to what it's like in the summer? In other words, it stays warm, right? What's their reason?
Not a practical one. It's just because air regulations are no longer the same. And so refineries go back to producing something that is a little cheaper,
But as far as atmospheric or weather conditions, for the most part, there would be nothing to prevent them. Alaska, North Dakota, Chicago, understandable.
There may be chemically, but I mean, it is always a warm weather climate. So you'd think that they could have a different blend. But, Matt, you're getting into the red tape and the regulation. And I'm sure, if we had a chemical engineer on here, maybe there would be a reason chemically as well. But yeah, I mean, that's a thought-provoking question. Absolutely true. Even if it doesn't save me, like, here's the thing, Matt, if I could stay on the same type of gasoline year round, even if it's going to save me a penny or two, it would also prevent the big spring surge that we've been talking about that's going to be coming. I would rather pay a couple cents more every year than not having this. It's by the way, my brain immediately thinks the time change. Everyone's talking about the incoming time change that happens every spring. It's a headache. You lose sleep. People have heart attacks. There's been studies that are done that flip-flopping is bad. I don't like the spring flip either in my gas price. I don't like them all of a sudden jumping up. So, that's a personal take, but there's probably some reasons that potentially could be solved that would make a much simpler year-round schedule.
Yeah, it's just a thought-provoking question that I have, because I'm just like, why if reformulated is about cleaner air, whatever the case may be, in the summer it lingers around.
Well, and then there's other things too, like the cold climates. Like winter gasoline contains more butane. That butane helps with easier startability in the winter. Your car starts
you don't
easier.
Need usually in Florida.
Well, that's my point. In Florida, but now you've also realized too. You've also just segmented the North and the South differently. So that's probably the system that exists now, is you're specializing, you're looking at local areas. But this highlights
just
the complexity.
questions,
Yeah, it's the complexity of the system we have is astounding. But I mean, those are terrific questions.
Yeah, it really very much is. So, I mean, the key for me is, like, I love learning about this stuff. I remember a year, probably, 8 months to a year ago, I snapped a picture. I was walking on the Greenway Trail down in Clarksville, Tennessee, getting myself a little bit of exercise. And I sent you a picture, because there was on the Greenway Trail, right, for exercise, here's this big yellow sign, oil pipeline underneath you. And it had like the different, I'm like, I'm walking over an oil pipeline on a Greenway Trail. How cool is that?
It's only a couple of feet below you.
Yeah, it's just like, how cool is that? Like, if that sign had not been there, never would have known.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that. I mean, there's a lot of pipelines and buried cables, things like fiber optic cables. I mean, here in Chicago too, electricity in the alleys, often comes from an underground utility. So very fascinating. But we'll leave it there, Matt, for now. I think the seasonal surge is coming. Be ready for it. We will talk about all the details, but this really was supposed to give you a very in-depth view of the complexity of switching from winter to summer gasoline. If you have any questions surrounding the spring surge, the switch from winter to summer gasoline, be sure to send us an email, podcast@gasbuddy.com. We'll talk about your question. We'll get it answered here on future episodes. But for now, be ready to dig deeper. The spring surge is coming. Matt and I will talk about it. We'll have all of your bases covered in future episodes. Thanks for tuning in.
Have a good one. This episode of Over a Barrel is brought to you by Valero. Night or day, rain or shine, Valero keeps the pumps full 24/7, 365 with a reliable fuel supply. Because keeping pumps fueled keeps business pumping and communities moving right now.